Good morning, Book Stew viewers and listeners. I'm so excited about today's episode. You know, at the beginning of many episodes, I will say, oh, I'm so happy that we're having this or that author back on again. But this is kind of extraordinary because this is Book Stew's second episode featuring Celeste Mohammed, and she is speaking to us from Trinidad, and she has written a book about Trinidad. The first time we met Celeste was another unique Book Stew episode where Celeste appeared with Lauren Francis Sharma, who you've also seen last year when we saw her at the Harvard Bookstore discussing her new novel, Casualties of Truth, which is very acclaimed. And now Celeste is back with a very acclaimed novel called Ever Since We Small. And this book focuses on Trinidad. And Celeste, your background as a Trinidadian obviously forms the entire book. Can you tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about who lives in Trinidad, who came to Trinidad, and how they got there?
Sure, thank you. I'm so happy to be back on Book Stew. Thank you for having me a second time. It's a real honor. It's not often that a writer who is living in the Caribbean still, who's, like I am, gets these opportunities. So I really appreciate it. So Trinidad could be described as the most southern island in the Caribbean island chain. It's actually two islands. The country is made up of two islands, Trinidad and Tobago. And it's funny because Trinidad is actually geographically closer to Venezuela than we are to Tobago. It's very, very close to the South American continent. So Trinidad has a very checkered history. It was first, Christopher Columbus actually landed here on his third voyage. He lost an anchor for one of his ships here, and he's the one who named the place Trinidad after the Trinity. Because when he landed, he saw three hills, and he thought of the Trinity, and he said, okay, like Trinidad. So we belong to Spain, but we were grossly underpopulated because the country was kind of just used as a stop-off point on the way to bigger and better places in South America. We remained underpopulated for a while, and then after the French Revolution, there were French people looking for somewhere to run to, and so a lot of French people came here. So you're owned by the Spaniards, but most of the people living on the island were French and speaking French. Then the British came, and the British, they conquered the territory. We became British, and we remained British until our independence in 1962. But along the way, again, it's one of the larger islands, so there's a lot of space available. So after the abolition of slavery, there was a labor shortage. And so the British started importing labor from various places, from China, from some Portuguese islands, from India. And they found that the temperament and the physical ability to deal with the type of work was best suited to the immigrants that they were bringing from India. And so those people in Trinidad, between 1834 between 1845 and 1917, indentured laborers were brought from India to work on the plantations. Indentureship was formally ended in 1917. And since then, so what you have is a very mixed place. All these languages, the Spanish, the French, the indigenous languages, the Indian, the Chinese, the Portuguese, all of these languages, all these ethnicities, all of them sort of melding together and creating modern Trinidadian society. Now, we can't forget in the early 20th century as well, we had a number, because of unrest in the Arabian Peninsula, you had a lot of Arabs coming, Syrian, Lebanese. So all of that it's a stew, kind of like your book stew. It's a stew that has given rise to modern Trinidadian society.
So do you think the fact that Africans were brought over enslaved to work the plantations and Indians were indentured servants, does that make for a different feel or any tension between people?
Yes, absolutely. Because you see, British policy, it was actually British policy, colonial policy, something called divide and rule, right? And you can understand it because the British were like this much, and then everybody else is this much in number, so huge. And so to maintain that power, you need to divide the masses so that so that they can't all collectively rise against you. So divide and rule was British colonial policy. So what they did was, okay, after the emancipation of the slaves, they have this labor shortage. They begin to bring in immigrants, but they stood up, if you will, a certain level of tension, and they began to create sort of a ladder in society. And so the freed Africans were made to look at the Indians as the bottom of the ladder. I am no longer the bottom of the ladder. You are. Mm-hmm. Right? And the indentured, they were indentured for periods of like 5 years. So it's not slavery. It's not, though it's the same ships and all of that. It's the same, a longer journey actually, but you're not a slave. And you're being paid. They were paid a pittance, of course, but they were paid. And at the end of the 5 years, you can go back if you want to. Those were the rules, the British rules. But they did not take into account the fact that part of Indian culture in India was that if you crossed this big water called the Kalapani, if you cross this dark water, you are outcast. You can't return and be treated the same way.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So saying to these Indian people, come and work, make money, and then after 5 years, if you want, we'll take you back. Very few of them actually went back because by coming, they had burnt a bridge that they could not cross back over.
Oh, so that makes your first character that we encounter in Ever Since We Small is Jayanti, who is an Indian woman, and she is from Bihar. Did I say that in the right way?
Yes, Bihar.
So Jayanti makes a humongous decision based on her circumstances to leave and come to Trinidad. And this part of the book, I think, is just, a lot of people are not familiar with the custom of sati, which was when widows were voluntarily or involuntarily asked to burn themselves on the funeral pyre of their late husband. And Jayanti is having thoughts. Jayanti was married to a man, a widower, twice her age, had not, at 18, they had not had any children. Her in-laws are not happy with her because of their childlessness. Her husband dies of a disease, and she is expected to mount the funeral pyre, and that all reflects on her family and on her husband's family. And so the part where she has decided that to honor everybody and to go along with their expectations, she is going to immolate herself. And in the beginning, she's convinced that she will receive honor and that this is absolutely the right thing to do. And in fact, I took one quote: duty was not the same as devotion, which I thought was a very interesting way to put that in context. And then you also said, and this is kind of in Jayanti's head, could it be that death chose men by some other criteria than the simple failings of their wives? So the wives were blamed for the deaths of their husbands. And so, of course,
Yes.
it made sense that they should sacrifice themselves since it was their fault in the first place. So I'm going to ask for you to do a reading in Jayanti's voice of the beginning of when she is about to climb onto the pyre.
Sure. I think I will. Yeah. I think I'll start on page 38 if you don't mind.
Sure.
Sort of midway. Now, I've not read this before publicly, so forgive me if it doesn't flow as smoothly as I would like. She lit a brand and began walking around the pyre, setting it ablaze. Then she mounted the platform, and as the flames caught and stretched upward, she sat, placed Pratap Singh's head on her lap, shut her eyes, and began chanting, Ram Ram Sati, Ram Ram Sati, God, God, I am chaste. However, as the wind drove the fire nearer, she felt its climbing heat. She struggled to breathe in the scorching air, and she began to doubt her anointing. Her arms and legs grew so hot that instinctively she shook them and groaned, as if that would cool her body. Then, just at the moment when she decided to fling herself into the thickest flames and end her life as quickly as possible, she heard, within the roaring blaze, the small voice of a woman whispering her name, Jayanti, Jayanti. She opened her eyes, and there was the Suhagin from her dream, now wearing the flames themselves as if they were a saffron sari. I am Sati, wife of Lord Shiva, the woman said with a gentle smile. Jayanti gasped, and the onlookers heard her exclaim, Oh, Mata, you have come to give me courage to do as you did for your husband's sake, which caused much exultation among the crowd. She is chaste, she is chaste. Sati herself has manifested to her, they cheered. The goddess shook her head, no. And from her flowing black hair floated a cloud of white smoke, which formed itself into another lighter-skinned woman. By her crimson sari, the items clutched in 3 of her hands, trident, sword, dish, and the way her 4th hand was positioned in a mudra of blessing, Jayanti recognized immediately the goddess Parvati. O Gauri, most perfect and nurturing wife of our Lord, let me return as you did to be helpmeet to a royal husband and mother to many royal sons, Jayanti called out. And the crowd roared again, Hear how she speaks to Parvati now. She is chaste, she is chaste. In a voice so musical, Jayanti wasn't sure whether the words were being spoken or sung. The second goddess replied, We shawl their failings, we buttress their weakness, we crawl so they may conquer, we burn so they are warm, we drown so they may breathe. Who was the they? Jayanti wondered, and who was the we? Then the wind seemed to cleave in two. parting the flames and pushing them in opposite directions, away from the fabric of Jayanti's sari, which had begun to smolder. Through the corridor of smoke strode a third goddess. The whole pyre shook with the thundering of her feet. Or was it Jayanti's head, throbbing from the force of the bang? And as this third goddess came to stand astride pale and pretty Parvati, the contrast was frightening. Her skin, deepest black as if charred, hung loosely on her bones. Her blood-red eyes were sunken, and a third eye flamed brilliantly from her forehead. She carried a skull-topped staff, a noose, and a sword. Her entangled black hair blew wildly about her shoulders. "Mahakali!" Jayanti screamed and cowered over her husband's body, which was now alight at the feet. At the name of the demon goddess, the crowd screamed too and stampeded in different directions. Yet within the fire, there was a quiet calm. "Fear not, Betty," Parvati whispered to Jayanti. "Do you not remember she is also me? When, to save the world, I jumped into Shiva's throat and combined myself with the poison he had swallowed, I became Kali. I am she, and she is what is hidden within a woman like me, who has sacrificed too much." Then Sati stroked Jayanti's cheek, while Kali danced tatkas, tate, tata, and Parvati sang a joyous bhajan. "Jayanti Zindabad, long live Jayanti. 3 generations of silver, 1 generation gold. Jayanti Zindabad, long live Jayanti." And why shouldn't she live long? What had she done that was so wrong? Yes, her mind had wandered during puja. Yes, she dreamt of other men. Hadn't Bina done the same? Why wasn't Bina here on this pyre? Why wasn't her husband taken early? Could it be that death chose men by some other criteria than the simple failings of their wives? And what did the goddess mean by generations of silver and gold? Was that the dream's message? A promise of a new husband and family? A promise of fruitful love? Subtly, languorously, in the same way that smoke from Sati's hair had wafted and curled and reformed into Parvati, Jayanti's commitment to die transformed into a commitment to live, a hope and curiosity for her future that she'd never felt before. What need had she of the afterlife if happiness awaited in this one?
Oh, it's hard to imagine that the novel would get even more dramatic as it goes along, but Jayanti does marry and migrate and go to Trinidad and has 11 children. And so the rest of the book deals with her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, all of whom struggle with different perceptions of their roles as, especially as dutiful daughters and dutiful sons. How much of the stories that follow, and the book is made up of really 10 distinct chapters, each of which just has a different focus, but the underlying thought process, I think, is mostly of the impact of religion and culture on the women, though there are certainly chapters devoted to men as well. How much of this comes from your own family background or stories that you were told by your family?
Yes, good question. So you would notice in the beginning, in the dedication, I dedicated to my great-grandmothers. They came from India on the same, in the same indentured, thing that I had just described on that whole program. And they never learned to read or write in English. One grandmother, a famous joke in the family is that she only knew one word. She knew to spell one English word. WOOD, wood. Because wood was what they needed to do everything, to collect, for fire, for everything. So, I am half Indian. So that has its own complications within the Indo-Caribbean community. But I grew up, although being half Indian, I grew up exclusively with my Indian family. In a house with my grandmother, and all her daughters and her sisters, like one big compound. So the only culture I know is Indo-Trinidadian culture. I don't really, I didn't really know any other growing up. And that culture, as you said, is one in which daughters carry a lot of responsibility for the dignity of the family. You're not supposed to bring shame upon your family. You must be a good, obedient daughter. You must be, a lot of things. And the gender norms within that community are a bit different. Family values, it's viewed that Indian family values are good family values, even if they tend to be a little restrictive of the woman, right? All of that is part of the family values. And so certain things are taken as gospel. They're taken as this is the way it is. They're just accepted. So when I grew up listening to the woman in my family talk about abuse as if it was normal, natural, to be expected, to be accepted. That's just how it is. And I grew up hearing stories of I went back and my grandmother used to tell us, she, arranged marriage in her day and time. Arranged marriage is how they got married. So her marriage was an arranged one, and I grew up hearing how horrible that was, but that's how it was. And then her younger sister, who was still alive while I was writing this book, she has now passed. I interviewed her again, about her life, because I had known the story loosely, and she told me again how her arranged marriage played out. Again, a very sad story. And then I interviewed other cousins, because even in my time as a teenager, young adult, maybe late teens, early 20s, marriages in the family were still being arranged for some people. And I remember my cousin and my aunts and so going to a particular arranged marriage and it being traumatizing for the younger woman like myself. The older women were fine. They were like smiling and happy. But for us, it was traumatizing because when the bride was this very young girl who was our age, the groom was this very elderly man. And when time came, it had all been arranged by the girl's father. And when the time came for her to leave with her husband, the screaming and the fighting because she did not want to leave. It was traumatizing. I couldn't, we couldn't just sit there and just be like, yay, this is a wedding. So all of those things, all of those memories, all of those stories, all of those things have sat in me for a long time. And I felt like I could not write another book until I wrote this one. Because those things I have struggled with as well. What is the role? What is my role as a woman in this culture? And what is it that I want to pass on to my daughter? What are the lessons that I want to pass on to her as to how you must live as a woman? And when I had written the entire book, and the last story I wrote was actually Jayanti.
Oh.
Because when I had finished writing the whole thing all the way through, I realized no one will understand why this is the way this is unless we go back to the very beginning and show that this culture and this history where a woman's body is not her own, where her will is something she has to force and impose, that goes back beyond these shores. It goes all the way back to our foreparents who would have come
How
from India.
do you feel like things have changed in a positive way for women of your generation and your daughters?
I think so. I think that possibly the generations after me and my daughter, and so things are a lot better for them. You have much less arranged marriages happening that we know about or hear about. People are freer to choose. Um, but you know, and I hope that in time it will be completely eradicated. But there's still in the culture sort of this. It's been there for so long, sort of this unspoken rule as to woman and the level of sacrifice that is required of an Indian woman. One thing I should note is that it really wasn't until I think it was 2017, which is fairly recent. It wasn't until 2017 or 2018 that the law in Trinidad was changed so that arranged marriages of little girls, 10 years old and so, to men would no longer happen.
Was that change made in India as well? And if so, did that come first before it changed in Trinidad?
Yes, it changed in India before. Many laws were changed in India. Whether or not they were in India is a big place, so whether or not the changed laws are actually being followed, I can't say. But a lot of things changed in India, at least in the law, and were not changed here until, well, recently or belatedly. Some things haven't changed. In fact, one time I went to an Indian cultural event at which the Indian High Commissioner was present, and when he got up to give his speech. Now, the Indian High Commissioner is like the ambassador for India living in Trinidad. He gets up to give his speech, and the first thing he said after all the dancing and the whatever that he had witnessed, he said, "Wow." He was amazed that certain aspects of Indian culture have remained fossilized in Trinidad compared to India.
So do you see India as your mother country? Do any Trinidadians now go back to India and, track down their
Oh
families?
yeah. I don't see it as my yes. I don't see it as my mother country. However, there are many people who that is a business, tracking down your family in India and tracking down your village and going, like, recently I had to go do research for Spree. So I went to the National Archives building and I was waiting there to be let in. And there was a gentleman there, and you're just making small talks. I said, "What are you here for?" And he said he came to look at because they still have, the book with all the records to try to find his ancestor who would have come. So it is still a very big thing. And there are many Trinidadians of Indian descent who have a strong affinity to India and who view it. I don't view it, but they do view it as their motherland. Actually, when we became independent from Britain, our first prime minister famously gave a speech in which he tried to address that, where he said, "From today, there should not be any more Mother Africa or Mother India or Mother China or Mother anything. There should only be Mother Trinidad." Because he knew that was there, that perception that going home is going back to Africa or going back to India or going back. So yeah, it is a continuing.
So then there's a balance of sorts between being proud of your ancestry, but also being very proud of being Trinidadian. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'm proud of both sides of all three sides of my ancestry. I'm proud of all of it. But we have to allow for those things to synergize into something else that may not be equal to, you know, any of those. So in my case, I am half Indian. I am 40 something percent West African, and the rest of it Scottish Irish, right? And so all of those things have synergized to make me who I am, this, as a Trinidadian. And I feel like that is that version of me, the Trinidadian, the me cannot go back and fit into any of those places. I can only be Trinidadian.
So do you feel like you have purged what was lingering for you? Will you now? I'm going to ask you about Spree in a minute, but will you revisit the Indian background, the African background, or like what's in your head for your next projects?
Well, I have substantially purged myself of the backlog of feelings that I had. I feel I've done, whether or not this book is successful, and it may not be, so the book has been, I would say, critically successful in terms of the reviews from people about, literature. It has also been successful in a way, in the one way that I really wanted it to be successful, in the sense that whether I was in the UK on tour, whether I was in Trinidad, Guyana, wherever I have gone, Indian women have come up to me and said, "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you. I've never seen our culture put on the page like this before in this way. I've never seen anybody speak honestly about Indian womanhood like this. I haven't seen it. Thank you so much for writing this book."
But no men came up and said that, right?
There is one man, and he's actually gay, who wrote me and said, "Celeste, this is a book I have needed my whole life."
Oh, that's even more gratifying that even one man stood up. Yay, that's great. Yeah. Tell us about Spree, which is your new book, or newer book.
Right. So the Spree is, the funny thing is, I wrote Spree during the pandemic when we could no longer get packages into the country. I couldn't buy books for my daughter. I didn't like reading to her on the device. So one day she was asking me a lot of questions about the steel pan. So I sat down and I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book for her about the steel pan. And that's what I did. And then I kind of I don't even know why I decided to show it to my agent at the time. And she was like, well, this is actually pretty good. So she went out with it, and it was acquired by HarperCollins, one of the HarperCollins imprints called Green Willow Books. And yeah, it's finally coming out. I'm so happy to see it finally coming out into the world. And I asked them if they would please get a Trinidadian illustrator. And they did. And I am so happy that they did, because the illustrations in the book carry so much meaning. There's so much nuance to them that, they're so joyful. You could tell that the illustrator is from the same culture.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading that. And I'm showing you all the cover, and you can see how inviting it is and how it just makes you want to open it up and read it and share it immediately. So our time is up, but which I'm very sad about. But it's been such a pleasure to have you back again. And I cannot recommend Ever Since We Small enough. It's, there are 10 stories, and each is kind of stands on its own, but it makes for an amazing integrated whole story of an incredible journey and a family's incredible journey. So I thank you for writing it. I thank you for coming on Book Stew. And I hope we will see you again in the next couple of years with another new novel or more stories.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, viewers and listeners, you have your assignments. Ever Since We Small, and then in July, watch for Spree. Have a good night.